Okay, so now it's time to get into some basic data types in JavaScript. But before we do that, actually, we should talk about how you create variable names. So JavaScript, basics. Okay, so before we even talk about types in JavaScript, we should talk about how to create variable names. So technically, we call that identifiers. How do you create identifiers? This would apply to the names of methods in JavaScript and also the names of variables. So identifiers. So you're going to start an identifier with any alphabetic character, the underscore character, or a dollar sign. Any one of those is okay. You can include any alphabetic character, any numeric, the underscore, and the dollar sign. They are case sensitive. There are some languages that are not case sensitive, but JavaScript identifiers are case sensitive. Now, the things that are banned in JavaScript are the following. There are reserved words, incredibly, there are things called future words, which are not reserved words. Well, they're reserved, and also predefined words. If you want to find out what these are, Google this. It's annoying that JavaScript has 3 flavors of banned words. I mean, that's crazy, but that's what happens when you have a committee designing a language. All right, I would have just said the following are reserved words, but they're not. You got reserved words, future words, and predefined words. Okay, now let's talk about comments. Comments in JavaScript work just like Java, so you can do // or /*//. So that's how you take care of comments. All right, so now that we've taken care of identifiers and comments, let's actually talk about some types. So there are a lot of different kinds of types, and some of them are weird in JavaScript. You could probably get by as a superficial kiddie JavaScript programmer if you didn't understand the difference between the different types that JavaScript has. But it's very important because you are a computer scientist that you understand the difference between these types. They're subtle but meaningful differences. All right. So first of all, JavaScript has something called primitive types. So what are those? Well, okay, I'll give you an example. Var, so I'm declaring a variable, x is equal to 1. And var y is equal to 1.2. These are examples of a primitive type called a number. Notice that I have used lowercase, all right? Here's another primitive type, s equals hello. This is another primitive type called the string, lowercase s in string. Var b equals true. This is a primitive type called a Boolean. Var u. This is a primitive type called undefined. This means that the variable's been declared but not initialized. So I just want to say that it's declared but not initialized. Okay. If you were to do this, document dot, or I won't do document dot, I'll do console. So console dot log you would get undefined printed out. However, one thing that's really weird about Java, actually, I guess it's, Python's the same way. You don't have to formally declare a variable in Java. So I don't have to say there's z, for example. I can just say z equals something, and that will declare z. It actually declares z as a global variable, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But I could just use a variable without formally declaring it using a var. I make a habit of using var because I like to not have global variables in my program. And like I said, we'll get into that a little bit later, but I'm just making a habit of putting var in front of every variable that I want to declare and use. But let's say you didn't do that and you just wanted to print out console.log z. Now I haven't declared z anywhere. So is z undefined? Well, it turns out that z will be considered an uncaught reference exception because we did not declare z anywhere and we're just trying to use it, but it doesn't have a value associated with it. So it's going to be considered an uncaught reference exception. All right, cool. So speedily going through the language, we've now taken care of primitive types. And they're basically the things you want to use, right? You got your Boolean, you got a way of expressing numbers. Apparently integers and non-integer are treated the same in JavaScript. And you also have primitive strings. So we've got enough to be dangerous now. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is I want to get into control flow, but I can't do that until I tell you about Boolean expressions. So here is Boolean expressions. All right. So in Java, what are the comparison operators in Java? Well, the Java comparison operators are equals, not equals, less than or equal, greater than or equal. All right. And the Java comparison operators, or sorry, Java Boolean operators those are and, or, and not. All right, so it turns out that in JavaScript, the comparison operators and the Boolean operators are basically the same. But there are a few little weird things that we have to talk about. And again, I find these like personally offensive to me as a programmer. It's clear that this stuff was put in by someone in a committee that got worked up about some piece of minutia, and it just makes the language a little bit more confusing and weird. All right, so let's talk about some oddities. All right, so the string 3, is that equal to the number 3? So basically what I'm saying is, does this evaluate to true or false? What do you think? Well, it evaluates to true. is the string 3 greater than the number 2? This also evaluates to true. Now, this is weird, right? Because that is a string and that is a number, but JavaScript is converting, doing something called type coercion. To convert that string 3 into the number 3 and then allowing the comparison. But what if you want to make sure that, like, you know, if it's a string and we're comparing to a number, that should be false. All right, strings are different than numbers. So one of the things about JavaScript, like Python, is a variable can take on any type, and later, if you change the type, it can it will take on that new type. All right, so if a is equal to hello, and then a little bit later a is equal to 1, that's okay. So what if we had a situation where we really wanted to know, we're comparing this thing on the left to the thing on the right, and I just lost control of my pen here, so hang on just 1 second. So we're comparing the thing on the left to the thing on the right, and if it's a string, we really don't want to say that it's equal, all right? So there's a way to do that in JavaScript, and the way you do that is you say, is 3 strictly equals to 3? This is false. So this is called strictly equals. Ugh, how crazy is that? But this is a way to make sure that there's no type coercion that's allowed when you do strictly equals. So if it's a string and you compare it to a number, it's considered false. You can also do strictly not equals. And that would be true. All right. So let's look at a few other things that might be, you might find a little odd or surprising. So is hello greater than hello? What do you think? Got a capital H here, lowercase h there, everything else is the same. Is that greater? Well, this is a little bit of a trick question. The answer is it's false, and that's because the ASCII value for h here is smaller than the ASCII value for the lowercase h. The ASCII value for uppercase h is smaller than the ASCII value for lowercase h. So that hello, even though it's a capital letter which appears bigger, is not actually bigger than the lowercase hello. All right. How about this? Not 0. That's interesting. Can that be evaluated? And it does get evaluated. This evaluates to true. So anything that is non-zero is considered true. Anything that is 0 is considered false. So this evaluates to false, and then this not makes it not false, which makes it true. So numbers can be converted into Boolean values. And if you think about it, if you were going to do that kind of conversion, do a type coercion of a number into a Boolean value, when you think about what is false, that's like the absence of any ones. What is true is the presence of any ones in the binary representation for a number. So pretty much any non-zero number is going to be true, and 0 is going to be false. All right. So some other things that you might want to know about, which are crazy. Okay. So I'm just going to write down these rules because they're sort of interesting. So any non-zero number is going to be true. Undefined, if a variable is undefined, it's going to be considered false. If a variable is 0, it's going to be considered false. So if we have a variable that has the value 0, it's considered false. There are other weird types that JavaScript has. Whoa. So one of them is null. That's a type. That is also considered false. So you know in Java you can have a null. Well, you can also have null in JavaScript. In Java, um, yeah, I guess in Java, if you try to use a variable and you haven't defined it yet, it's not set to the value of null. It's considered undefined. It would be an error. It'd actually be a compiler time error. So there is something sort of like undefined in Java. But JavaScript, it actually has a value of undefined, and it's okay to try. You can print out that value, which in Java you couldn't. If you tried to use an undefined variable in any way, including printing it out, it would give you a compiler time error saying this variable hasn't been defined yet. Okay. In addition, we have this really weird value, not a number, which we'll get into in a little bit, and that is also considered false. If you have an empty string, that is also considered false. If you have the number 0 in a string, that is also considered false. Any other string, that is considered true. Any string that has a value. And finally, if we go the other direction, if you can take a number and convert it into a Boolean, can you take a Boolean and convert it into a number? And it turns out that true has the value of 1, and false has the value of 0. So type coercion is going to occur when you have a Boolean, if you need to add something to it. If you wanted to add 1 to it, true plus 1 is going to be 2, and false plus 1 is going to be 1. Crazy. But there you go. All right. Let's get that back. Oops. Here we go. Okay. So let's talk about some basic control flow now that we've introduced these Boolean expressions. And then we'll get to talking about more interesting kinds of types. All right, so first of all, we're going to talk about selection. So selection is a fancy way of saying if statements, all right? So what I can do is I can say if n is not equal to 42, I'm going to say console.log bad number. I have a little bias here. Else console.log good number. So we've got n-way selection. You can also say else if you want. So that's pretty much, that statement looks pretty much like what you would expect in Java, and it works the same way in JavaScript. All right, so let's talk about iteration or repetition. So the while loops and for loops that you're used to working with in Java work pretty much the same way in JavaScript. So I'm going to create a variable count, set it equal to 0, and then say while count is less than 10, console.log and plus count. And maybe I'll do a paragraph and a closed paragraph here as well. Just make that nice and clean. Oh, I'm doing console.log. Fine. We don't need that paragraph then. So we're writing it. I wouldn't put HTML on a console.log. And a 1, and a 2, and a 0, and a 1, and a 2, and a 3. And then I'm going to say count equals count plus 1. Okay, that takes care of our typical while loop. No shock, it looks just like a while loop that you'd have in Java. All right, let's do a for loop. So for, notice I'm putting the var count here. Var count equals 0, count is less than 10, count plus plus, and then I'm going to do the same thing, console.log and a count. All right, so that takes care of two flavors of iteration, of repetition, the while loop and the for loop. So we're already getting to a point where we're getting kind of dangerous, which is awesome.